Welcome to the Kaleidoscope of Possibilities, Alternative Perspectives on Mental Health. My name is Dr. Adriana Popescu. I'm a licensed clinical psychologist and leader in the field of mental health, energy psychology, addiction, trauma, and empowerment. In this podcast, we will be exploring mental health from a variety of perspectives, from the spiritual to the shamanic and beyond. What if mental illness isn't everything we think it is? What if everything we see as a pathology is actually a possibility? What else is possible with mental health?
Hi everyone, Dr. Adriana Popescu here with you today with another episode of Kaleidoscope of Possibilities, Alternative Perspectives on Mental Health. I'm really excited to have today as my guest Carla Shohet. She is an integrative trauma psychologist, nervous system health practitioner, and creator of the Thanara Healing Program and the NTN Pathway Method. Can't wait to find out what that is. With a 25-year background in psychology and somatic therapy, Carla helps individuals and professionals heal from complex trauma, chronic pain, and narcissistic abuse by reconnecting to safety in the body and restoring nervous system health. Her work blends cutting-edge neuroscience with deeply compassionate body-based practices, drawing from modalities like IFS, somatic experiencing, Feldenkrais, brain spotting, hypnotherapy, and more. Carla also hosts a podcast called Time to Unlearn, where she shares education, hope, and healing with a global audience. Welcome, Carla.
Hello. Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to talk to you again.
Now, tell us where you're located, because we hear the accent. Where in the world are you right now?
I am in the UK, in leafy Hertfordshire. I am actually originally Italian, though. Came here to live in the UK when I was just 15 with my family, but stayed. And so now I sound British, as my
Yes,
Italian, my Italian friends like to tell me. You're so British.
Well, I'm so glad you could be here. Tell us a little bit about yourself. How did you come to be doing this incredible work that you're doing?
So I've been in private practice since 22 years. I'm giving my age away, as I always do on these podcasts. If my grey hair wasn't enough. But basically, I studied professionally as a psychologist, your typical talk therapy, for the greater part of my career. But I think what shaped me most as the psychologist, the integrative trauma psychologist I am today, is really my own lived experience of healing myself at a nervous system level through discovering almost by accident that I was actually carrying a lot of trauma from narcissistic abuse. And I had no clue, even as a seasoned psychologist. And I'm not ashamed to share that, because I think a lot of us who are therapists are often seen as having it all together. And then we carry shame for not having it, or not feeling that we do have it all together, and we can help others more than we can help themselves. And, I came upon this kind of more somatic, including the body in the healing, because of my own lived experience, rather than my initial professional training, which then led me into my own healing, and then led me to studying the nervous system, neuroplasticity, and how trauma actually imprints the body. It's not just in the mind. Yeah.
Absolutely. And this is finally, I feel like we're getting somewhere with this idea. But I know that I'm about, as far along in my career as well, about 25 years.
Mm-hmm.
And even though I went to a transpersonal program, my experience was a little different. And we did talk about body, mind, spirit, and spirituality was a big part of my training as
Mm-hmm.
well. But I don't think the conventional psychotherapy training programs are anywhere equipped maybe now that's changing, but when we were in school, we certainly were not learning about trauma, the physiological aspects of trauma. It was talk therapy, talk it out, look at the how your thoughts create the feelings, and the CBT kind of traditional approaches.
Yeah.
And I don't know about you, but pretty early on, I saw that wasn't going to work with trauma, that there was much more to it. And that in fact, when people early on would just talk to me about their trauma, it seemed like they would leave the office feeling more traumatized than they were when they came in, just from just talking about it and doing nothing with that energy.
Yeah, absolutely. And unfortunately, I think, well, at least in the UK, I can speak for the UK. In fact, funnily enough, my eldest daughter has just started to study psychology with forensic investigation. So that should be interesting as to what she's going to be learning. And I think she's ahead, because she already knows about the body through what I've learned, which I share obviously with my family. But yeah, it's unfortunately still today, I think, something that isn't commonly taught at foundational level, which it should be. I think this education about the nervous system, which really truly is our operating system, should be taught from school age, because it doesn't have to be complicated, but it is foundational to our well-being, not just mental, but also physical. And a lot of professionals, I do work with a lot of professionals, and we were chatting before, and like yourself, and this is not common knowledge, even amongst seasoned mental health specialists, unfortunately. Right. And it's quite scary. And when I came across this work, I wished I could have gone back to all of my patients from 20 years previously, so that, I could have helped them differently and long term. Because the problem is, it's not that, modalities like CBT that you mentioned are worthless. They're very good for symptom management, but, trauma, as I said, it lives in our body. You can't, you can't constantly live managing your symptoms, and to be able to really get root cause resolution and long-term well-being, you have to work in the deeper parts of the brain which connect to the body, and you can't really separate psychology from physiology. And we're starting to finally understand that now, thankfully.
Yes. Yes. So
Yeah.
many things I want to riff off of what you just said,
Mm.
but let's talk for a moment, yes, about that. Like, why is it that um, people, I think, have a lot of misperceptions about healing from trauma? Like, it's in the past, get over it. Right? This sort of more cognitive perspective. Change your perspective, get over it. You're not a victim. You survived. You're okay. Da 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 da. But trauma lives in the body, and just managing the symptoms of it, right? I think conventional Western psychiatry says PTSD, for example, post-traumatic stress syndrome, right, is an incurable condition that you will have for the rest of your life. And the best that you can do is learn to manage the symptoms of it. And I think, well-intentioned, but a lot of Western medicine and doctors and even psychologists are seeing the trauma through this lens. Can you comment on that and what your experience has been when we actually do the root cause healing, or I think is how you referenced it? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, I think the way that I can kind of summarize that in one sentence to contrast, what I used to do before and what I do now is hopelessness versus hope. I now give hope to patients or clients. I don't like the word patients, but it comes back up sometimes. Patients also gives you kind of a sense of lack of agency, which is actually one of the problems that we experience with trauma. And actually, we do have a lot of agency. Our bodies want to heal. We just kind of need some guidance, support, and know-how on how to help our bodies heal, because trauma disconnects us from our bodies. And the other way, the old way, it gives you a sense of hopelessness and helplessness, which is not helpful, because you then kind of think, okay, this is a life sentence now. This is how I'm going to have to live. And that to me is not living. That's either survival or just existence, which is, none of us deserve that. We can all heal. And I don't give that hope lightly. I know that it's true because I've lived it myself, and because I see my clients now, that go through my programs and my model of healing, which is very, very different than before. I'm not just giving them tool to manage themselves. I'm giving them tool to heal themselves. It's a complete, and there is no kind of destination where we get healed and we're suddenly, unfortunately, it is a lifelong, it's a lifelong process, but I eventually doesn't feel so heavy and, oh, I have to heal myself. It feels like a real gift, because we then have agency, and we can create a life of abundance, a life that feels good, that we can feel good in our own bodies, and we don't have to struggle along until we die. So that's I would say the main difference is hopelessness versus giving hope. Biver.
I love that. Yeah. It's really, it's speaking to, I think, post-traumatic growth, which is a term that more recently has emerged in the last few years that we're hearing more about, which is what I understand it to be really is a shift in your perspective on what happened to you, right? Like,
Absolutely.
you're moving out of this victim mentality and into, like, I call it triumphing over trauma, right? Like, kind of like the phoenix bird rising from the ashes, if you will. Like, there is a light at the end of the tunnel. If you work through the experience, you release the trauma from the body and you shift the perspective. That's what I think you're referencing, right? Like, when you experience something traumatic, oftentimes you do develop this helplessness, hopelessness, the victim consciousness. I have no control over what happens to me. I'm powerless, all those things. Part of the healing involves shifting those perspectives also, right? Coming
Absolutely.
out of the place of powerlessness and into a more empowered space where you have the agency and you get to choose. No, you maybe, didn't have control over what happened, but you have control over how you cope with it now and what you do in the future around,
Absolutely. Absolutely.
right?
No, and this is why I don't like diagnosis anymore, because it pathologizes people. It's like you've got now this stamp of, and I know that some diagnoses help people feel better in the sense that, oh, I've got ADHD, so that's the reason. There's nothing inherently wrong. I'm not broken. It's because of this that my brain works this way. But it doesn't mean that that's it. Then you can just kind of stay with the symptoms because of that label. I think it's better to look at things from a nervous system perspective, because it always makes sense. When we look at it from a trauma-informed nervous system lens at individuals and how we operate in, from our emotional parts of the brain, because it's not just the logical parts of the brain that we are involved in this kind of, deeper work. It just changes everything. It changes. So it's not about a change of perspective, as in like having a positive mindset. It's actually to do with the body, because that's the body drives. It's not up here, because I did my journey upside down, really. I did all the mindset work, all the affirmations, the journaling, and they have an absolute powerful place within this healing journey that we go through. But I did all of that first, the positive psychology and the, trying to get, and I used to have like spurts of post-traumatic growth, or what you might call that, feel better. But then, there would always be the subconscious patterns that were programmed in me, in my body, that would sabotage me. And, and then there would be the shame that would be reignited. And then there would be, the imposter syndrome that would kind of pull me back into these old patterns that I just felt so much shame around. Is like, how is this possible that I just can't, there's something wrong with me. And I think that's what trauma does. It makes us feel like there's something inherently wrong. There isn't. We just have to, the journey to repair our nervous system and rewire these kind of patterns that were programmed into us because of our experiences, especially and particularly in childhood. And in particular with, talking one of my specialist topics, or subjects, or whatever you want to call it, is narcissistic abuse, because that's what I came to understand that I went through, and how it affected me on multiple levels and layers. And that's, that's the kind of work that we need to do, to the education, the expansion of our nervous system capacity and flexibility is the first step, which is what I did last. And then, and my whole journey of healing got prolonged for years, because I just didn't really know, what I was doing, or where to work, or what to do first. And sequencing is really, really important in this work for trauma healing, for healing the root causes, which is, you mentioned earlier, the NTN pathway means now then next. And that's how I work within my Thanara program, which is my self-led healing program for, for people to do it themselves, but also with one-to-one clients. I follow this model, which is sequenced, so we work on, your adult self as you are today. What are the symptoms? What's going on? Why have you come to therapy? And kind of trying to start to build that foundational capacity of the nervous system to hold more before going to do the trauma therapies, which is the other thing I went wrong with. When I realized, oh gosh, I've got trauma. I didn't realize I had trauma. How could I have not realized in all these years being a psychologist? And I went straight for the, EMDR and all the trauma therapies that you can think of. And of course, they were dysregulating me more and more, because I just didn't have the capacity in my nervous system to be able to hold any of that. And so, yeah.
Let's talk about that for a moment, because that's so important. There's so many things I want to, again, explore with you. But let's talk about that piece for a moment, because I do think, often people will come to therapy having heard about these amazing trauma healing methods, EMDR, brain spotting, whatever it may be. And there is, you can't just jump right into, um, like, especially in the first few sessions, you can't just jump right in unless someone's already done that work and has a foundation in it, and just start doing trauma processing, where we're perhaps revisiting the traumatic experience, right? Like, the person's nervous system isn't yet maybe prepared to do that work, or there isn't even a sense of safety yet like there's not, the trust hasn't built up between me and the client. So yeah, can you talk about that, the importance of those early stages of, you called it increasing the nervous system's capacity to do the work. Talk to us a little bit about that. And maybe also could you include, Carla, I think people understand the short-term effects of, the fight, flight, freeze response. Most people understand that now, but what are the longer-term effects, physiological effects on the nervous system of having traumatic experiences?
Yeah. So unhealed or unprocessed stress, chronic stress in the body, makes you ill physically. It's not just psychologically that you get, anxiety, depression, or suicidality, self-harm, all these diagnoses that we hear about, which are basically all found, rooted in nervous system dysregulation, which is what traumatic experiences cause in our nervous system, being stuck in these kind of survival responsive or fight, flight, freeze, which are survival. We're not meant to live in these nervous system states. So it's almost like, burning an engine, because you're kind of burning the candle at both ends, and you're just kind of constantly asking for your body and your nervous system to work extra hard, being hyper vigilant, or then going into shutdown, and there's never any capacity for rest, because perhaps the part of the nervous system we're not born with, because it's not about survival, it's called ventral vagal, is something that we have to be taught from when we're born, and we have to then build by mirroring our parents or being in an environment that feels safe and supportive. And trauma happens when we don't have that support or that space in our nervous system to be able to process an event or a person that feels like overwhelming in that moment. That's what trauma is. It's not the event per se or the person that abused you. It's our capacity to deal with that stress response that happens in the moment, whether it's possible to complete it because we have enough support. So we go fight, flight, and we're able to shout or run away, to make it very simple, or whether we then shut down and go into freeze because we didn't have that support, and we get stuck in these survival patterns. And the way that affects, it's like, as I say, it's like constantly driving a car at 1,000,000 miles an hour. The engine is going to wear out quicker. And therefore we then get things like IBS, fibromyalgia, physical symptoms, which are basically those symptoms. And I can speak to that again on a lived experience. I have lots of different chronic conditions, pain conditions, and illnesses that have been, a nightmare to try and figure out what's the cause, what's the solution. Oh, and it's one of those things. It's like, we don't know why. We don't know why this is happening. We don't know how to heal it. And a lot of people then carry these labels. I have, ME, chronic fatigue, POTS, fibromyalgia, as I've mentioned, all these kind of, that you tick these boxes, but just actually they seem like incurable, and it's not true. They're not incurable. It's just a really tired, worn out nervous system that is trying to communicate through the body, because that's, the language of the body is sensation, and that includes pain, right? It's trying to say, hello, listen to me. You need to kind of slow down, calm down, come and rest. But we don't know how to rest when we are in chronic stress response, survival responses. Because perhaps, it's so easy to have traumatic experiences as a child anyway. And then you add, even people that haven't had the kind of what people talk about. I don't like the distinction between little t and big T trauma, because I think that's all based on your nervous system capacity anyway. But, even if you haven't been through, the classic kind of traumatic, abuse or neglect, or, what people would, classically think of as trauma can be something really small, and it can be kind of an accumulation of chronic stress through life, and that literally burns the engine. and it's like, unless we are taught how to go in the homeostasis, how to stay within a window of tolerance that feels, that fills our body with a bit of rest, that allows us to repair from these stress responses and actually helps us complete these stress responses. So when the body is releasing hormones to help us either run away or hide away from things that feel too much, it stays stuck literally in the fascia, in the body. And unless we are able to help it release those hormones, those survival hormones that have been released to help us, we get stuck in this kind of chronic hypervigilance and, or depression, and we get stuck and that affects the body on a physical level. It's inflammation in the brain and in the body. I don't know if that answered your question.
No, yeah, no, you gave us lots of brilliant information. And I think to speak on the topic of sort of the weird autoimmune stuff, as with so many clients that I've worked with, and then I personally also had an experience earlier in my 20s. I became very sick with what ended up becoming, what they later found out was Lyme disease and chronic fatigue syndrome. And a big step in my healing process had to be looking at the unresolved trauma I was carrying in my body that was having exactly the effect that you described, like wore out my entire system, not just the nervous, but the hormonal, and I mean, because everything is connected. That at the age of 29, I had the biological markers of a 69-year-old. That's how depleted my body was. And I remember coming across the work of a doctor who was originally European, German, Dr. Dieter Klinghardt. And I remember reading an article by him, and he said, look, you cannot heal things like Lyme disease without addressing the unresolved trauma that is held in the body. And that's partly what started me on this path, right, of alternative kind of holistic therapies. And every time that I would do another piece of processing and working through multiple experiences that had happened throughout my life that my body couldn't deal with at the time, I would start to get better. Then the other things we were using, the herbs, the homeopathy, because Western medicine had nothing for me, the other modalities could work so much better once we had addressed those pieces of trauma that were unresolved. And my nervous system, I was that person who was constantly agitated, constantly in a state of fight or flight. I didn't really do freeze. I did fight or flight and a lot of fighting as well. And all of that until I learned how to, with tools, I learned energy psychology tools to help me like regulate my emotions and all of that. And then working with the belief systems and all the things. But I feel like you have to start with the body. I'm with you. I think you have to start with the nervous system and giving people tools to at first manage those trauma responses, the activation of the nervous system, create a window of tolerance. Perhaps they don't even have that. And then you can get into trauma processing. And then I feel like even later, it's working with the beliefs, like I'm broken, there's something wrong with me, I deserved it. Like you can't get to that because that's a different part of the brain that goes offline with in a fight, flight, freeze response. You have to deal with the physiology first and the emotions and the energy of the trauma.
Yeah,
I'm going
I
off.
mean, we speak from the same hymn sheet, basically. I absolutely agree. And you can do all the, as I said, the cognitive stuff, all the kind of logical, rational brain things, and also the body stuff, actually. There are so many modalities, so many methods to heal ourselves. It's just whether we understand what we're doing, we as a therapist, as well as we as, people who are trying to heal themselves, right? And this is going back to what you said earlier about, we go straight into, oh, I've got trauma, I'm just going to go trauma release, so I'll do TRE or EMDR. And sometimes it works. I've had lots of feedback from clients that have come to work with me that, they're complete opposites. So someone goes to EMDR and they're like, it's life-changing in a positive way. The other person, it's terrible, it's re-traumatizing. Why? Because the client's nervous system is different, in a different place when they do that therapy. And B, unfortunately, as we said earlier at the beginning of this conversation, a lot of therapists don't know what they're working with in terms of nervous system. So they might be really experienced at that modality that maybe is like EMDR, is very protocol led rather than client led, like a brain spotting. That's why I love brain spotting. But unless you have this kind of polyvagal theory, which is the nervous system piece, understanding and education yourself, instead of helping people, you might be damaging people. Because, if someone comes to EMDR already at the top of their kind of fight flight, and they start talking, which is the rational part of the brain, instead of, revisiting, they're reliving the trauma. And that can be really damaging. It can embed the trauma even further. And then they feel rubbish, and EMDR is rubbish. It doesn't work. Well, it does work. But unfortunately, whoever took you through that process didn't really know where you were in your nervous system to be able to, which is why I love now, and I feel confident integrating all different modalities, because I can, first of all, I've worked with my nervous system, so I know where I'm at. When I go and work with someone, I know how to kind of come to a grounded place so that I'm not kind of, in my head about my own problems while I'm trying to be attuned to someone. And as you know, as a brain spotting practitioner yourself, attunement is a massive piece of that therapy to be able to go deep. And without that, it's just two people sitting in front of each other, not much is happening, right? But also if you can't tell because you don't have the somatic understanding to be able to even see what's happening for the client, then any therapy can really go wrong or just kind of skip on the surface. And it's the same with things like yoga or meditation. They're amazing, but I spent 2 years going to yoga every single day, and re-traumatizing myself, because my teachers, as lovely as they were, I used to have massive emotions, and it's just your heart chakra opening. What the hell does that mean? I don't know, but it was really re-traumatizing because I felt really out of control. I didn't know what was happening. I felt shame at bawling my eyes out during these exercise classes that were supposed to be good for me, and my body got healthier on the outside. I looked amazing. But I was also doing weightlifting and I looked really strong, but inside I was just crumbling because it was just too fast, too much, too soon, and I didn't know what was going on inside the body. I was mobilizing so much energy and not knowing what to do with it. It felt dangerous because my body actually was trying to keep me small and shutting me down in that dorsal vagal that shut down the utmost survival strategies that it possibly can have to keep you alive. And I was doing the opposite. So it's almost like you end up in this kind of cognitive dissonance or internal conflict where it causes so much pain, and it just feels like everything is out of control and you can never be better, you know.
And then you think you're the one with like something's wrong with me. All these other people are loving this yoga and it's so great for them and they're singing its praises, or EMDR or whatever it is, right? Why am I? See,
Mm,
I'm the effed up one, right? Because
I'm the
there's
problem.
something
Yeah.
wrong with me. I'm not getting the result everybody else is. But what they're not is they're not trauma informed. We hear that term a lot these days, trauma informed. Across so many things. Yeah, yoga. I mean, Kundalini yoga that can be extremely powerful, but also extremely dangerous, or psychedelic assisted therapies, right? Like,
Yeah, all of it,
or
literally.
taking psychedelics. I mean, we just got done with Burning Man here in the US, and I always see, I'll have people come into therapy because they had a bad psychedelic experience because they didn't know that when you ingest those substances, you can be reopening the trauma capsule or trauma cone, they call it different things, and getting to that unresolved trauma that lives in the body, lives in the subcortical regions of the brain. And then they're coming out of there traumatized. So
Yeah, and it feels really scary, doesn't it? But it's like that with everything. I think, unfortunately, with trauma, as in with narcissistic abuse, it's
yes,
become
I want to get to that next. Yes.
yeah, it's become more trendy, right? There's lots of pop psychologists online that talk about the nervous system and rewire and reset, and let's like, trauma is like in the body, but really people are, if they don't have that real understanding of the nervous system or polyvagal theory, if they're not educated on it, they are almost these things become almost other coping strategies. So you can do meditation to distract yourself from the actual sensations in your body, so you're kind of bypassing things, and it can almost be, so in one way it's really good that we're speaking more about trauma and the nervous system and narcissistic abuse and all of these things. But it also, in life everything is cyclical, I believe, right? And I'm hoping we're on the cusp of kind of being able to kind of separate what's real from what's kind of just you know marketing strategies online where oh yeah, reset your nervous system in 2 days or whatever. It's just it's not, there is no switch or button to do that. It's actually a very long, unfortunately, patient and sometimes boring work that takes a lot of commitment. It's not, I don't want to put people off, but it's not just as easy as going to yoga or shaking your body or meditating your way out, because actually those become you know bypass. Yeah, absolutely. So you have to be really discerning, both as a therapist training with people and as a person who goes through therapy to get help. You have to be able to be, and this is the thing, isn't it? You have to be educated enough to just ask, to be able to ask the right questions, and or be connected enough to your body, which is a big ask if you've had trauma, right? Because that really disconnects us from our body, to know what your gut is saying when you meet someone, because that sense of safety that you mentioned earlier is a key piece to being able to do vulnerable work with someone. And I also have had really, really traumatizing experiences, because at the beginning of this kind of journey of really going deep, I because the brain likes what's familiar and it thinks it's safe, even though it isn't. It kind of drives you towards people that are not necessarily safe, if that makes sense. It kind of just wants to be with what feels normal because it feels safer. But actually, I ended up working with people that were very unsafe for me. Might have been very safe for other people, but it just, it takes time. So if anyone's listening and they've been through a similar journey, don't give up, because you will learn with time and keep going, learn more about your body. That's why the nervous system piece at the beginning is so important, so you can actually start to have discernment about what your gut is saying, and what's my body saying, is it a yes or a no? Or, you don't gaslight yourself into thinking that you should be doing certain things or with certain people, and you're full of self-doubt, and then you're just kind of floundering around looking for help, and then you're kind of just stuck in another loop of not changing very much at all. Yeah. Yeah. Mhm. Yeah. So narcissism is on a spectrum, first of all, and not everybody's a narcissist. There is also, I believe, a healthy level of narcissism, which is where we can actually give ourselves that which we need without being harmful to other people. Unfortunately, again, because of pop psychology, it seems that everyone's a narcissist nowadays. That's not true. I don't look at it as a clinical diagnosis anymore. Um, I think it's a chronic pattern of relational harm, which is rooted in, things like manipulation, emotional dysregulation, that nervous system kind of trauma, and power imbalances. And I frame both narcissism and codependencies, and narcissists are codependent as well, as protective strategies of the nervous system, not personality flaws or personality types, but these are nervous system protective strategies which are rooted in dysregulated environments. So it doesn't excuse by any means any abuse that anyone might have suffered by at the hands of someone who's highly narcissistic. But narcissism is also a protective strategy of the nervous system. So it whereas a codependent would be self-doubting and always thinking there's something wrong inside of them and looking inward, the narcissist would be projecting that inner pain, that vulnerability outwards, because they're just so defended against that vulnerability. They just cannot admit or even go near their emotional wounds, which are so painful that to their system it feels like death, and therefore they have to project their pain outwards onto other people. Again, doesn't excuse it, but it's just for us to understand it better. Especially if we've been victims of narcissistic abuse, I think it's important that we understand there's not, it's not, yeah, it's not a personality flaw, even though it feels like it is a nervous system dysregulation issue. The problem is that often, or in my experience, because of the system of a narcissist, especially on the high spectrum, is so defended against this vulnerability of theirs, I don't know if they can ever truly heal, because you need to have some sense of kind of wanting to be introspective and wanting to take some responsibility, accountability, and they just can't do that, because literally to their system it feels like if I admit I'm wrong, or even if I say genuinely I'm sorry for something, I'm going to die. Basically, if I go anywhere near how worthless I feel, I might die. That's what's, subconsciously internally happening for the narcissist. So they'd rather just blame, shame, and point the finger to someone else, than ever do the work that maybe a codependent, on the other hand, has the capacity to do, because they're always kind of looking at themselves and, where they can improve. Does that make sense?
It does, yeah. And I think because a lot of people don't understand this part, and it is hard to wrap your mind around, because their armor is so impenetrable, and the sort of the arrogant, self-centered sort of and self-aggrandizement sort of that you see, it's hard for people to understand that there is actually potentially a traumatized, wounded person underneath all of
Yeah.
that. Um, it's so very difficult to see. So you look at some of our political figures that I think maybe fall into that category.
Absolutely.
It's hard to imagine that some of those people are actually very wounded inside, because it certainly doesn't come across that way any at all in their demeanor. So that's really important information you just gave us. And I think a lot of people also have the question of, is it intentional? Like when we talk about narcissists tend to engage in gaslighting type behaviors, how aware are they that they're doing that? And how intentional is it that they're doing that? Or is it just sort of unconscious, projection and acting out?
I think it can be both. And it comes from different places. Again, it's how the nervous system responds. So just to give you an example, I think, well, it's a question I've had for a very long time. Do they actually know? Do they believe their own lies, for example? Do they know what they're doing? I think definitely for some it's intentional. Absolutely. They know exactly what they're doing. And they just won't do anything different. There are some self-aware narcissists, I think. There's actually one that comes to mind that's online. He's called Mental Healness, I think. And he says that he is a narcissist who is aware and in therapy. I think he's very unusual, and he admits that he still struggles to do different than what his system is telling him to do, even though he's self-aware. And there's other people like Mastin Kipp, who's a big name in the trauma healing space, saying that he's a healed narcissist. I have my own kind of understanding around that, because I, having mirrored narcissistic kind of behaviors as an adolescent and into young adulthood myself, because I was mirroring behaviors that I grew up around, I know that I could have called myself a narcissist in the past, I suppose, but I understand it from a different lens, which is I was mirroring behaviors as a child growing up, not knowing what else to do. And the difference for me is that every time I did automatically react in a narcissistic way, say someone would hurt my feelings and I would just cut them off, no explanation, I would feel terrible inside. And I don't think the narcissist has that capacity to feel bad about themselves. So that's the difference. And I would always, in time, sometimes it would take me years, circle back to the person I had, in my opinion, mistreated at that time, and do the work that it took to repair and actually apologize. And I've done that several times with different people, from the past, because I had loyalty to the narcissist in my life. I also just didn't know how else to behave. My nervous system reacted. I had very little agency and understanding or education as to how I could instead respond in a different way that felt more aligned with my essence, my core essence of who I actually am. So yeah, it's a blurry line, I would say. So when I hear someone like Mastin Kipp saying, "Oh, I'm a healed narcissist," I think he's probably like I was, and I would never call myself really a narcissist. I think I had quite narcissistic behaviors because that's what I learned. So I was mirroring, and I've seen that in other people as well. Kind of you when you're being projected on by a narcissist, you then have reactive abusive behaviors, and that makes you look like the narcissist, but actually you're not. You're just a codependent that doesn't know how to defend themselves anymore because your own strategies just don't work. So then you get, it's kind of that cycle of you pass it down without even knowing. But the feeling inside, I think, is very different between a narcissist and someone who's kind of copying or modeling behaviors.
Yeah. Well, I mean, in like anything, it's along a spectrum, right? There's traits, and then and then it goes builds from there. Right. So I do want to come to what you think, how you would describe codependency, but can you give some examples of what narcissistic abuse looks like?
Well, I mean, love bombing followed by lots of, so love bombing in that they're very complimentary. They'll make you feel like you're the best person in the world, and they're only eyes for you. It's just very soothing to, especially to a codependent's nervous system, where you are absolutely reliant on external validation to feel that you are good enough, to feel safe, that you're loved and lovable. So the narcissist and the codependent are kind of a match made in in hell, really. They're like a magnet to each other. But yeah, so the narcissist will love bomb, devalue you, gaslight you, neglect you emotionally with the silent treatment, cut you off without any explanation, like I explained. They'll shift blame. They'll kind of, always throw it back to you, as if it's your fault, no matter what it is. They do these word salad conversations where you get very confused. And on the spectrum as well, it can be really a power imbalance that where they are so in control of you, including coercive control, which in the UK is actually a criminal, punishable by criminal justice. Really, it's they control you on every level financially. They control your freedom. So again, on a spectrum, and there's often for the victims who are normally codependents, who are they have a lot of kind of self-silencing behaviors, self-doubt, fear of taking up space. They will experience it as almost as a confirmation that they're not good enough, and they get trauma bonded to these individuals who are, and trauma bonding is not, again, it's not something that happens in the mind. It's like a physiological addiction to the highs and lows that are, between the love bombing and the horrible bits of being in a relationship with a narcissist, where your body's actually experiencing a cycle of, feel good hormones, like, and then it followed by the devaluation phases and critical phases. You are then experiencing those stress hormones. So your body then gets addicted to chasing the high. And that's why people then get, they start to kind of accept breadcrumbs of love, because it's like a drug addict, that you get relief, not just by taking the drug, but actually just kind of being able to hold the drugs is enough, to relieve the horrible feeling of, the stress hormones that are coursing through your body when the attention is kind of suddenly pulled away from you. Yeah.
So would you say, this is interesting, would you say then, because I work a lot with addiction,
Yeah.
that, well, so two things. One, typically what you see is both the narcissist, the person engaging in those behaviors, and the codependent person both have trauma in their history, typically.
Mm-hmm.
And then are they basically self-medicating their nervous system, like they might with drugs and alcohol, to kind of numb the pain or to try to keep the semblance of a window of tolerance by using drugs and alcohol or food or whatever it is. Are they basically self-medicating by staying in this sort of toxic dynamic with the roller coaster and the highs and lows and everything?
Yeah, I love that, self-medicating. Actually, that's a really, really good way of explaining it, because it's what their nervous systems are used to, right? The narcissist nervous system needs you to confirm that they are excellent, and the codependents too. They need to feel that they are useful in some way and are serving to get their needs met, which is, I need to feel lovable. So yeah, it's a really toxic combination, unfortunately, and that's why often narcissists are attracted to codependents, and codependents end up often with narcissistic people on the other end. It's like as I said, a magnet to each other, and it is a way for the brain to self-medicate. Yeah, because the brain again sees familiarity as safety. That's why is one of the things I often share in the UK. There is the statistic at the moment is that it takes a woman in a domestic abusive relationship, it takes her 7 times to go away and come back before they leave permanently. And that's not because they're stupid or weak, it's because they're trauma bonded. And that means that, to their brain, being in an abusive situation, a toxic situation, is safer than being in the uncertainty of being with someone either alone or with someone loving, for example. And that's why a lot of women will get stuck in a cycle of being with another narcissist, and I say women, I work with women
It's
mostly.
it's
Yeah,
stereotypical.
either.
That's often what we see.
Yeah, men too. But generally speaking, we are, all kind of subconsciously still operating from patriarchal and colonialistic kind of systems. So yeah, it tends to be, in my experience anyway, mostly men that are the narcissists and women that are the codependents, because these are the roles set by, the systems that we are, all part of. But yeah, so the brain seeks familiarity even when it's unsafe. And therefore, you go from narcissist to narcissist to narcissist, and it's like difficult for the brain to then perceive safety in a place where it's uncertain, unfamiliar. For example, women that end up with a really loving, safe partner and end up sabotaging that relationship, because it's not because they're silly, but they feel bored, for example, sometimes in those relationships, or that they don't deserve it. So they sabotage it and go back to what the brain knows, which is safety, which is why that nervous system piece of building capacity, like you said, building that kind of window of tolerance is such important work, because otherwise you will just end up automatically going into places that you've been before, even if you don't want to, even if you're consciously, even if you know that that's bad for you, you end up going back, because knowing and feeling is completely different.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like drug addiction, right? You know it's bad for you, but you can't like stop the compulsion of wanting to do it, because
Yeah.
it's such a it's physiological, not just psychological, all the things. Yes.
Yeah.
So I know our time is running low. I do want to ask you though, so when you're working, I'm assuming more with the codependents who actually
Yeah.
want
Sorry.
have the insight to heal and want to heal, what would be sort of what would the process or the stages of it look like with your model?
So as I said, it's first and foremost, we work with the nervous system where it is at when they come to me. So we start with the nervous system work, education on polyvagal theory, and exercises or practices to start to build a felt sense of safety in the body, which most people were just like, what does that even mean? And that's the piece that takes probably the longest, and most people want to skip because it feels tedious and boring. And that's things like orienting or grounding or breath work, or trying to understand, trying to learn. It's like a baby wanting to learn to walk. You fall, you get up, you fall, you get up, and it is done in little steps, so it doesn't overwhelm the system into feeling like it's too much, or I just can't do it, and then you just want to run away from it. You have to titrate the process, meaning you have to go really slow, usually, depending on, again, it depends on where the nervous system of the person is at. If you're in fight, flight, and constantly anxious, if you meet them as a therapist and you go too slow, it will feel just like unsafe. So you have to start wherever the client is at the beginning, to start to build an understanding of what a sense of safety feels like in your body. It's like learning a new language again, the language of the body, or remembering it at least, because as children, we do speak the language of the body, being able to feel even, a sensation in your body. A lot of people just like don't understand when I say, what does it feel like in your body? I don't know. I feel nothing, or I feel everything, and either of those can be dysregulating if you don't know how to hold the client in that process. So it's step by step by step, baby steps. It's like, as I said, learning to walk or learning a new language. You have to start with ABC and go slowly through that process and repeat, not just in therapy. This work isn't about, for me anyway, as I work, is not about the client relying on the session at all. It's a lot of education and giving the client the tools that they can put into practice in simple ways in their lives, whether, especially when there's already overwhelm in most people's lives nowadays anyway, to ask them to do tiny little changes so that the brain perceives them as, oh, okay, that's different, but it's safe enough. Learning to feel safe enough in your body, in your life, in new environments, in new behaviors. And that's what helps us to kind of unlearn old patterns that were programmed in us probably very early on, sometimes pre-verbally as well, and trying to kind of create new neural pathways in our brain so that eventually they become the new way that we operate, the typical kind of analogies. The people, when they see a path, a well-treaded path, they will kind of walk in the grass on that threaded path. And to create a new one, it takes more effort and more time to create that path that then becomes kind of, okay, as easy as the old one. And then the grass grows over the old path and you would just go this way instead. I'm not sure if I've done a very good job of describing that. That's the kind of typical kind of analogy we make to explain what neural pathways are like, old ones and, unlearning the old stuff and relearning new ways.
No, I think you've explained it really well. And it's been such an important piece. Thank you so much for going into such depth about all of this, because I think this is the stuff that people don't necessarily know about when it comes to trauma. So I feel like we've given a real trauma 101 education here.
Yeah, absolutely.
So thank you.
No,
Thank
my
you
absolute
so
pleasure.
that.
My absolute pleasure. I love talking about this stuff. And the reason I focus so much on the nervous system piece is because I think professionals like us still don't quite get to grasp with this piece. Of course, trauma release is so important. The positive psychology element of kind of, post-traumatic growth and higher self is so important. Everything has its place. But the sequencing piece is what I think is missing in a lot of the work that we do as professionals. And I think this is important information to share with just in layman terms so that people know exactly where to go first. Yeah.
Yes. And where should they go? Great segue. Where should they go if they want to find out more about you and your work?
Yeah. So I think the best place right now is to my website, which is still being built, and it will become refreshed with lots more resources for people to help themselves to start this journey very, very soon. And it's carlashohet.com. It'll probably be in the show notes at some, because my surname is a funny spelling. I also am, and there's lots of helpful content on social media, both Facebook and Instagram. However, I'm not currently, or I haven't been as active as I used to be, just because I'm trying to be in integrity with what I believe. And I don't believe that those spaces are very healthy for us. They can get us hooked into these algorithms and kind of waste our time a little bit. And until we've got the capacity to be able to use it to our advantage, I think they can be harmful. So soon I will move my communities of people from Facebook. I have a group on Facebook called Wild Mother, which people are welcome to join, but it will soon be moved into another space where you have more agency even interacting in that. So you're not, you go to these platforms and suddenly you're like, oh, I'll just skip this. And I don't know, I'm sure this happens to you, right? You open your phone with the intention of doing one thing and suddenly you're like distracted by all the noise. And I'm trying to kind of, our brains aren't made to take in all the information that we're bombarded with nowadays. So I'm trying to, walk the talk in a way. And so, yeah, go to my website. My podcast, Time to Unlearn You Mentioned, is also a really good resource. And I've got some really, really good conversations that I am going to publish very soon with people like Dan Siegel, Deb Dana, all the big names in this trauma healing work, all the experts. So they're going to be really, really helpful as well to understand more in depth for free. I think that's it, really. And, always email me, Carla at carlashohet.com if you have any questions. I'm very open. I just really want to share. My mission is to help people stop existing and start actually living, because we all deserve that.
Yeah, right there with you. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Adriana.
And your experience today. Thank you, everyone who has stuck it out here till the end, listening and watching. If you have found this episode helpful, please do share it, rate the podcast, subscribe, all the things, work those algorithms, help us get this information out there to the people who are seeking, because there are many people struggling and we know they don't have to. So thanks, everyone. We'll see you next time on Kaleidoscope of Possibilities.
Thank you for joining me for this episode of Kaleidoscope of Possibilities, Alternative Perspectives on Mental Health. This has been Dr. Adriana Popescu. If you enjoyed this episode, please like and subscribe and share with others. To find out more about me, my guests, and more, please visit my website at adrianapopescu.org. See you next time.